Welcome to the podcast, everyone. I'm here with Karl Pontau, founder and CEO of Squash and Stretch Productions. And I think we're going to talk about a great subject for both founders and startups, which is the storytelling and why it's so critical for founders and startups. Karl, thank you again for joining the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Karl, why don't you talk about maybe your Squash and Stretch Productions and how you ended up in the business of storytelling?
Sure. So you might not be surprised here. I actually have a story about why I started my company, which informs the how and the what. So I can start with that.
Sounds good.
All right, cool. So I've been an artist my entire life. I grew up drawing, painting, sculpting, big Legos kid. And I got my passion for storytelling from my dad. He's a really good storyteller. And I knew I wanted to study animation when I saw the first Toy Story film. I was like, ooh, I got to do that. That's so cool. And then beginning of 2002, I started to feel like something wasn't quite right with me physically. I've been a competitive swimmer my whole life, so I knew what I was supposed to feel like. And it wasn't like, oh, my shoulder kind of hurts. It's like a general blah feeling. But by August, they still hadn't figured out what was wrong with me. And I had lost 50 pounds, then sunken cheeks and eyes. I was really pale, started to get really bad headaches. So my parents took me for an MRI up in Walnut Creek. And we were waiting around for another appointment when my pediatrician called and said he's going to drive up from Pleasanton to come talk with us. And I remember I was sitting, we saw him walking with this big envelope in his hands. You could tell he'd been crying. And he brought us into a little side meeting room. I remember I was sitting knee to knee with him in this big U-shaped chair with really high armrests, kind of leaning forward towards him, when he pulled out the results of the MRI and showed me I had 2 brain tumors. And it felt like I got punched in the chest. I actually moved backwards in my chair. And for the next 2 weeks, everything sounded like the adults from Peanuts, kind of what, because never had the flu, never broken any major bones, never been stung by a bee. I'm pretty sure I've never been bitten by a mosquito. But I got brain tumor diagnosis at 15 years old was a complete sucker punch out of nowhere. But I got so much help from friends and family, and my high school adjusted my schedule and got me a tutor so I could still graduate on time. And people I barely knew were giving food and gifts and other supports really inspired me to want to give back and help as many people as I could, because I'd probably be dead if it wasn't for all the help that I got. And then in undergraduate schools, I was studying animation. There was a big student digital art and design competition I participated in. It was a big screening at the end of like 1,000 people in this big auditorium. I mean, maybe 10 people in the room. But when everyone laughed at the joke of my animation, I was like, oh my gosh, it's so cool. I can connect with people and have a bigger impact with animation and storytelling. So after grad school, I started my company, and we tell exceptional stories for exceptional impact, helping tech, biotech, and healthcare companies attract more of the best clients and employees using storytelling and animation. No matter whether a business is B2C or B2B, or B2G, they're all really H to H, which is human to human, and humans tell stories. So helping those sort of companies, more people in the world get their lives improved. Our clients' business does better. We get a happy client. Everyone wins. It's a way for you to have a bigger positive impact on the world around me, and that's why I do what I do.
Karl, I mean, that's such an inspiring story, especially, having that diagnosis when you were
Thanks.
15. And I guess it's interesting because the way you're giving back is kind of very inspiring in itself, which is about telling stories. And you kind of mentioned it as human to human, right? I've been a firm believer that business is like 90% relationships, right? But I kind of prefer your way of saying human to human. Let me ask, what is, it a lot of people, especially engineers, especially if they're founders, they always seem to feel like that the features and functionalities would sell themselves. And you're shaking your head, and I'm shaking my head as well. But how do you, well, let me ask, how do you think we fall into that trap where it's about, hey, the more features I have, more the functionality I
Yeah.
have, versus about telling stories? Is it our training, our education kind of lulls us in that false sense
No,
of security, or something else?
it's more fundamental than that. It's just it's that we as human beings, we all, as part of a survival mechanism, we care about ourselves. Uh, and so when we like something, we get really involved in it, and we make the mistake of thinking that because we care about something so a super amount, really a high amount, that other people will as well. And they'll care about the same things we do. And unless your target audience or your target client is yourself, that's a fatal mistake, because you're not trying to sell to yourself. And so the mistake most companies make, especially startups, is they talk about all the things they find really exciting about what they're doing because they spent so much time and like and learning how to do this sort of work, and it's something they're trying to solve a big problem they think they can solve doing X, Y, and Z. So they're really excited about the thing they're doing and all the features and gizmos and all the tech or the how advanced it is. And the harsh truth is that their target audience, their target investors, just they don't care because and it's not anything wrong about you like you personally, and it's because you don't care about the same things they do either. It's just it's part of um the way our brains are wired. You have to kind of reframe the way you think about your business and your marketing and the stories you're telling to be from the other person's perspective. And it's really hard, especially for this is in our country because we don't really teach kids how to actively listen, how to use empathy, how to really put themselves in someone else's shoes. um it kind of leaves it up to the parents to do that, but it's something that especially as an entrepreneur, you absolutely have to be thinking about your business from out the outside in. And so when you're creating content, it's not about okay, what do I want to say that I think is really cool. It's about okay, what is the result I would need to get from this piece of content or this message. And then it's who is the audience I'm trying to speak to, and then understanding them really well, knowing how they're feeling, what they're thinking, what their problems are. Then okay, what do I need to tell them that's going to get them to respond the way I need them to get the result I want. And that is very backwards way of thinking from what most people think. Okay, I want to say this to this person was going to get me this result, and it just doesn't work that way. So, um, and the other thing that most people, especially people in engineering and like science and medicine, very technically brilliant people,
Mhm.
but they and so that, and that as much as we like to think of ourselves as thinking beings that feel, we're very much feeling beings that occasionally think, and we still make decisions using emotion every time, and we rationalize it later. And so it's really hard to basically convince people they should buy or invest in your technology because if your message is all about the stats and features and the data, it's basically missing and not communicating at all to the part of people's brains that actually makes the decisions. So data is great, but when you if you wrap a story around it and have that narrative element that puts things in context and gives things meaning, an emotional element behind it, uh, that's where when you start persuading people. And it's one reason why I also like for the one of the biggest problems I see with startups is like their mission, vision, values. Those statements like in the business plan, they're always so focused on what the company does. It's very like we do X, Y, and Z, and our vision is to
Mhm.
make the world better by doing X, Y. It's like if there's no like it's not just a short little like blurb that's going to define basically what should be the essence of your company. it's so it needs to basically tell a story in your mission and your vision and your values that gets people inspired to want to support it and invites them to either join you as a client or join you as an employee or as an investor. And so if you don't have that emotional story behind your why your company exists and why you do what you do, then you're basically trying to run a mile with no feet.
I think that you've said a lot, and I think a lot that's relevant. I want to kind of go back to something you said at the very beginning, which
Sure.
was, we're very, especially in let's say the United States, we're very much focused on, I would say, tactical, right? Learning. It's
Yeah.
about STEM, etc. And you kind of pointed out we don't actually encourage active listening. It's we leave it up to the parents. I think is the best way that you put it. Is there something, as an older individual, older entrepreneur, irregardless of age, is there something that that entrepreneur, that founder, even that employee can do to kind of encourage or build up their active listening skills, or at least acknowledge that maybe they have that gap in their self reflection?
Sure. That's a great question. And yeah, it's I mean, part of it is it starts as being mindful of how you interact with people, and it starts with also before that, I guess, is it's caring about the other person and wanting to really form a connection and not just think of like your clients as like a transaction or as like a wallet with cash you're trying to extract. Because if you just go straight for people's money, you're gonna miss it because people can tell when they're being sold to, or like no one likes those like the spammy marketing or like the hard sale, like strong arm tactics. People can tell sense those a mile away and they'll ignore you. And one of the most successful companies in the world, like your Apples and your Nikes and like the Coca-Cola, they all, if you look at their marketing, it talks nothing about what they do. It's all about the emotion and the results and the experience of their product. And so it's, they know what people are looking for. They know their audience really well. They know how people are feeling and how they want to feel. And so they craft their messaging around that. So when it comes, they start by listening to their audiences. And so when it comes to for entrepreneurs, or if you're trying to basically, how do you learn how to listen more? It really just is becomes making it a habit, starting by um, just giving people another chance to talk. One of the best phrases you can use to show you're actually wanting people to like, or you want to listen to people is "tell me more."
Mhm.
And then there's a great book where I picked this up from called "Never Split the Difference," which is about negotiation. But any sort of like negotiation requires listening really well. Especially the guy who wrote it is like ex FBI, like hostage negotiator. Where if he's not listening, then someone's going to die. Um, but he talks about mirroring back what people say to you. So you practice like a game of making sure you're able to, once they finish talking, say, "Oh, it sounds like I heard." And if you can repeat back what they said, the more accurate, the better. That really shows them you're actually listening. And if you kind of make that a little game, that's what I've done. It's gonna, okay, I want to make sure I'm able to repeat back what they said and at least summarize it. That kind of changes the way you're thinking from being, okay, what am I going to say next to? Okay, and then make sure I know what they're saying. Otherwise, if I can't repeat it, I'm like I lose a point or whatever. At
Mhm.
least for me, that really has helped me build up my active listening and skills and helping people show that I'm not just waiting for my turn to speak.
Interesting. I think that's definitely great advice in terms of like how to build up those that active listening. I think another point that you kind of mentioned earlier, which is um, about the the integration and telling a story with data, right? Which is kind of interesting because especially now in the startup ecosystem, we're very much focused, or at least the trend is, hey, big data, artificial intelligence,
Yeah.
and all that, and everyone trying to tell a story with data. And it's kind of interesting because I feel like, and be interesting to get your thoughts. It's a little bit left brain, right brain, right? Because a lot of people will say, "Hey, I'm an engineer, I'm a scientist, etc. I'm very right brained. Accessing that left brain is very difficult for me. Like, how do I construct that story?" And I wanted to kind of ask you, and not just for entrepreneurs, but in general, how do you see people doing it the best in terms of integrating data and that storytelling? Like, how can they build that skill set? Um, or do you think right now people are forgetting that storytelling is critical and this overemphasis on data is kind of um, making us listen less in some respects, to your earlier point?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's the whole idea that people are right brain or left brain is kind of a myth. People use both sides of their brain all the time. And storytelling is a skill just like anything else. If you want to work better, want to get better at it, you can. It's like creativity. Creativity is a skill. Unfortunately, it's kind of beaten out of students as they go through our education system.
Hmm.
Um, so if you're trying to, you have important data points you're trying to communicate, and being able to wrap them in a story and use um, this narrative as like the connective tissue between the key points you're trying to make. There's a lot of great storytelling frameworks you can use to combine data and the narrative, but it's not just like story. People are going to make the mistake of storytelling being like a marketing tool or um, like just something that is like it's like a tactic. But it's when it's done right, it really it's not just it's a core of what makes us human. So it goes beyond just a marketing tactic or a sales tactic or a just a tool. And so everyone's is telling stories whenever they're communicating with other people. It's either just telling them better or worse than other people. Um, and so a lot of times you see it's on one, a company A's website may describe like the experience they provide for their clients as like, we do X, we do Y, and then we do Z, and you get this result. And the company B could do the same sort of thing, but they explain it as, you'll enjoy how, like, you'll go through this sort of process. You'll see, love how we that this sort of thing happens, and then making it more of a narrative, and like kind of and showing how looking at it from the client's perspective and how they're feeling when they go through the process. And here's like the data to back up the amount of impact it's going to have. So you can still influence the narrative and the data together, but by making it more than just a bulleted list of kind of steps, they're both still stories technically, but one has a lot more evocative language and is a lot more emotionally driven and more focused on the client as the hero instead of the company being the hero. And by optimizing the messaging that way, and you can still plug in data key points to emphasize, like, here's the sort of thing you'll experience, and there's like the data that backs up this is what you'll experience, and here's the results you'll get, and here's the data that backs up those results. That's a way you can meld data and storytelling together, and really wow people and get them excited to want to work with you. Whereas what company A did is what a lot of people do, which is very like technical and dry and transactional. And it's like, we do X and Y and Z, and we do this sort of stuff for these sort of people, but it's all about the company. They ended up sounding like that guy at the bars had two drinks too many who's loudly boasting about his new car, and I was going like yacht shopping next week and how low his golf handicap is, and no one really likes that guy because it's all focused on him. So it's, when it comes to mirroring or merging data and storytelling, it's um, using the data points is like to support the key plot points of the story, but then having the proper connective tissue between the two. So it's not just a bulleted list of data, because our brains store energy or store information in narrative formats. Even if you're like, if you're come home or like when done working for the day and your partner asks you, hey, how was your day? You basically, you might tell them like, well, first this, then this, and this, and this, and this. It's like you're telling in a narrative format, and you can either say it just like a bulleted list, or you can embellish more and make it more narrative. A narrative, and one is way more like your partner probably knows more about how your day actually went with the more narratively like embellished one, rather than just this. They're probably gonna want more detail than just simple basic. And so when you think about the same thing for your marketing, if it's just like giving people a bulleted list and expecting it to sell, you're missing the fact that our brains want way more information, way more like a different experience before we buy into something.
I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head in some respects. In my experience, especially with relatively new, recent grads or student entrepreneurs, they think, hey, this is the format that I need to follow on a pitch deck, right? Because that's been drilled into them. They do a search online or go through an accelerator, and it's like, I need to have this slide, this slide, this slide. And then at the end of the day, it's almost like breaking them and saying, yeah, you need all this information, but you also need to tell a story. That's what's going to be memorable. And for whatever reason, we seem to have forgotten to link like this framework and say, at the end of the day, this framework's designed to help you tell a story, because that's what's going to be memorable. And exactly to your point, that's how we as humans, which ultimate decision makers, are making that decision. So let me ask you, do you think, in terms of, because coming from a startup entrepreneur or founder perspective, a lot of founders or entrepreneurs listen to this say, I don't have time to like tell a detailed narrative, like the bullet points is all what I need. Do you think that that is a big mistake, and it's something that actually is hurting the growth of their business?
Yeah, it's like there's a there's a term like this. I think Stephen Covey kind of made commonplace, which is sharpening the saw. If you
Mhm.
see a guy basically trying to cut down a tree with a dull saw, and you say, well, why don't you stop and sharpen your saw? Like, no, I'm too busy cutting this tree. It's like, well, you're not going anywhere, you're not making much progress, not being very effective or efficient with a dull saw on a tree. If your messaging, like the bulleted list, is not getting you the results you want, which it probably won't, or then you need to change it. And um, the when you keep going basically like also like the banging your head against the wall and expecting like the wall to fall down. Like eventually your head's gonna fail first. But having that, um, if you take the time to really add some, it doesn't have to be like a long verbose like 3 volume like story. I've seen some of the most concise, powerful storytelling in Nike ads where it's like 6 or 7 words
Hmm.
that there's so much like the subtext and and from like there's also a picture involved. Um, but like in 6 or 7 words, you get this boom right in the feels, and you're like, wow, that's so inspiring. That's so awesome. And there's no picture of like the product they're selling. There's like it's just I think it was one of it was like people like Olympians, recent Olympics. It was like the one of the fencers. She won like the in a match or something like that, and she was celebrating um the the 6 words were like, "Be the hero you never had."
Mm.
6 words. Be the hero you never had. Yeah, okay. And that's
Hmm.
just like for someone for that target audience, which is female athletes, which is Nike's entire focus. All their marketing is on like the supporting female athletes, especially also like female athletes of color.
Hmm.
Like that's so powerful, and it's 6 words, so it's not like going on and on and on, super verbose, taking up people's time listening like this like huge long story. But just if they said like the how thick the cotton was on like the sports bra she was wearing, who cares?
Hmm.
But that line, "Be the hero you never had," oh my gosh, there's so much of a story behind like the and the person who's reading is going, oh my gosh, I didn't have any heroes, and I got here, and I want to be like a hero, and I like there's all this like personalization to the story that comes from that, that is all emotional and all really inspiring, and it's what has made Nike, took them from an unknown brand to the behemoth they are now, is that sort of messaging. And so length really doesn't matter. It's about the quality of the story you're telling. And Nike are the like I said, I'll say the champions of concise, compelling, evocative storytelling that can fit on a like one image ad, or like, and it's super like the first ad they posted that um basically got them like to the national level, didn't even have their name on it. They just had the swoosh. And
Hmm.
there was a if you let me if you let me play was the campaign about having girls getting more into sports. They list all the basic positive results of girls playing sports. When it comes to like less domestic abuse and more confidence and more likely to go to college and more likely to all these like amazing things that any parent would want for their daughter. And it just had an orange swoosh out in the center. Didn't say Nike, didn't say anything about like any products at all. It was just, this is a cause we're championing. This is like our mission is to support female athletes. That took them from unknown to the biggest sports clothing brand or sports like attire or sports equipment brand in the world. And it's the same thing, same strategy can be used by any startup in the world for like no, besides like investing maybe like someone to help them like tell that story, but like they don't need a huge amount of like marketing campaign. They don't need a huge like infrastructure already built out, a huge uh like like mailing list and stuff. It's just basically telling the right story and getting that really solid, and that the same sort of results can happen for any startup if they reframe the way they look at their marketing.
It's interesting. I mean, you kind of highlighted Nike as like one of the prime examples of great storytelling. But I'm sure you've seen some bad ones as well.
Oh yeah.
And and I'm sure there are probably some startup founders and entrepreneurs thinking, well, I'm trying to reach my total addressable market, my TAM, right?
Yeah.
And and how do I think probably two questions in a founder's head would be, how do I make sure I don't make mistakes when I'm telling stories? And how do I potentially, as an extension of that, not only not make mistakes, but offend potentially a part of my total addressable market that I'm trying to capture?
Two great questions. My answer to the how do I not make mistakes? Part of me, I mean, the initial reaction is you want to make some mistakes, just make them faster and like and learn from them quickly and make sure they're small mistakes. Do a little test and see how things work out before you commit to something big and then have it blow up in your face. Um, so if you try to do something that's perfect, you're never going to actually start. You're never actually going to do it, and you're going to fail just by you're like kind of waste away on the vine. Your any sort of like early funding you have is going to dry up while you're waiting to become perfect. You're not going
Mhm.
to be perfect. I mean, like Apple, it was worth now like $2.8 trillion. Almost went bank. They were 90 days away from bankruptcy when they brought jobs back. Because they were talking. All their messaging was about this fact, like the stats or like features of their 600 some odd devices they were selling, and there were just a bunch of all they're all like not doing very a few doing well, but like the company was 90 days away from bankruptcy, and so they launched the Think Different campaign and like cut their market or their offer like the product line down to four
Mhm.
and turn the company around. So if Apple can almost fail and before they became the biggest company in the world, then you can afford to make a few mistakes. So don't try and be perfect. Uh, Perfect doesn't exist. Instead of being perfect, be flawsome. So you're
Interesting.
still awesome, but you have flaws. You're a company. You're made of people. Humans are not perfect. Don't try and present like we're this like the perfect startup. We're the perfect product. People can see through that, and they're like because they're sick of seeing like the Instagram perfect like facades people put up online. And so the better thing to do is authentic and what I call flawsome, where you acknowledge you have you're working on improving yourself or improving your company, and there's things that aren't perfect, but you own them up and you still emphasize like that these things make us even better because we're authentically human. um when it comes to like worrying about offending part of your like the target or your potential market, I mean, especially early on, hopefully you've narrowed down your target market very very as specific as possible, and so it shouldn't really be a problem if you're aiming at a very specific market for you to like alienate like a different market. That's not a big deal because they're not your target. But it, if you're going to avoid doing that, you basically it starts with knowing your audience and talking to them and listening to them and listening. Don't assume you know what they want, and actually sometimes just asking what they want is not great because they don't really know what they want. They'll say they want one thing, but they'll buy their wallet says something else.
Mhm.
So doing the right research and kind of know what um, how people are currently buying or what people are currently investing in. And that there's a great book by Dan Ariely called Predictably Irrational
Mhm.
for any engineers out there or like the technicians, very left-brained kind of in the traditional sense. Read that book because it's all about how humans do not make decisions rationally, but that there's still systems around it. So if you know how people do make decisions, you can design like inputs to get the right output you want from people. But it's not logic. If you think, well, if this makes sense logically because we offer to do this and this, that means people are going to behave this way. It's like, nope, that's just not how the brain works. So definitely read that book, and have like adhesive and something to pick your jaw off the floor and reattach it a few times. You're gonna go, huh? Like, what, really? One of my favorite examples from the book, like that just blew my mind, was say you're in your driveway fixing a flat tire in your car, and one of your good neighbors like walks by, you've known him for a number of years. Say, hey, go help me fix my tire, and he says, sure. And he spends an hour helping you fix your tire. That's one scenario. Same guy, same like situation, but you say, hey, help me fix my tire for $3, he'll be insulted. Because when you bring money into it, now he's thinking about how much his time is worth. He's not thinking about the social interaction, the social relationship he has with you guys. And so logically, he should be happy because you get $3 extra than he would have for something he would have done for free. But just because of the way our brains work, when you bring money involved, something like the social contract gets thrown out, and so people behave illogically. And so stuff like that that you need to kind of be aware of in your marketing and know that um, when you're dealing with people, that's not a rational thing. So are you going to make some people mad? Sure. As long as they're not the people you're trying to specifically buy from, it's okay. But if you get your target narrow enough, it should be fine. With a few other people, outliers, or a few like 1% or so like are upset, that's you're not gonna be able to please everyone. And so it's like being perfect. Don't worry about it. As long as enough people are liking it, then that's great. And also it's even better if there's something like as part of your mission, you're kind of a cause you're championing against, like it's your tribe rallied behind you to support your business, kind of like the Apple versus PC thing.
Hmm.
That's a whole like marketing thing just to get their tribes rallied up to, or at least Apple to like get Apple users rallied around them to go after the PC, like they basically show those PC guys that we're like hip and cool and we're better than PCs. But it's sure that maybe they made a bunch of PC users mad, but who cares? They're not trying to sell to them. So if you're marketing, it might be better to actually have a some sort of like villain or something that you are get your tribe, your loyal customers rallied around your company to help defeat this villain or this like problem, whatever you want to frame it. That's a good thing because people get kind of they're more likely to support or like it's weird, like the negative survival based emotions are a lot stronger in us. Our brains are wired to help us survive. So like fear and anger and like those emotions are a lot more evocative and persuasive than more positive emotions, which unfortunately is why like our media is the way it is these days. They just
Hmm.
want fear at you because it's what sells. Um, so just try and ignore it as much as you can. Um, but if you can, so when you're marketing, if you can get people rallied around an enemy to oppose, you'll make some people mad. But if it helps you like get your tribe around your business, and overall your business mission is to solve a problem, then vilifying that problem to get people to really go for it and support your business and actually make overall things better, then that's a good thing to do. So if you're going to make people mad or upset a certain group, make sure you're doing it for a good reason, or like a intentionally, not as an oops, I didn't realize we posted something. Like there's an ad I saw recently, I can't remember what the brand was, but some from fashion magazine, but like come hang with like some fashion designer who she had hung herself. The
Hmm.
line like on the ad in the magazine said come hang with, and I can't remember the woman's name, but she hung herself to this. So it's like they pissed off all their like readers and like the potential customers because they were just tone deaf and realized that that was how she died. And
Hmm.
so don't make people mad that way. If you're gonna
Hmm.
make people mad, make sure it's a like a purposeful like way to end up doing more good than just making people mad. So it's definitely a gray line or gray area to kind of walk there because you don't want to use that power for good, please.
That makes a lot of sense, and I totally understand what you're
It's like
saying.
something that Dan Ariely says in the book Predictably Irrational is like you'll realize that you can use these things to manipulate people. And basically in his book on the 40 says, please use this for good. Because it's basically like hacking like how our brains work, and most people aren't even aware they're doing like they're behaving this way. So if you're gonna read this, just please use this for good. So I will pass along that disclaimer, that plea for if you do read the book, use it to have a positive impact on people's lives, not manipulate people, because it's unfortunately what a lot of the same things that people use to like start cults and do like awful things, because
Hmm.
it does speak to the core of how our brains work and what makes us human. And so it's can be dangerous if mishandled. So please handle it properly.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
So, we've talked about like the good and bad related to storytelling.
yeah.
How does Squash and Stretch Productions and yourself? How do you help startups with their storytelling?
Sure. So when like I mentioned before, with like the mission, vision, values, and the kind of the core purpose behind the company, a lot of people don't really haven't examined why they do what they do. And so like I help people often tell that story, like I told at the beginning for myself, why I started my company, helping them figure that out for themselves, and then helping them helping them like structure that so that the mission of their company is basically an extension of their personal why. So, for example, like one of the things I say, what my purpose is, my mission is, um, basically increasing empathy in the world. Like if I could snap my fingers and cast a spell and make everyone in the world as empathetic as humanly possible, but casting the spell would kill me, I'd still do it,
Hmm.
because if that we have more people or more empathetic, then stuff like war and political divides and civil like inequalities would all just be gone, and stuff like cancer and leukemia and Alzheimer's and climate change would be a lot easier to solve if people were to work together more. But since magic isn't real, I use stories instead. So it's like my vision, like purpose of my company and my life. And so helping people create those sorts of stories and then applying them to and helping them like describe what makes their business really different, which is often the client experience they provide, is not really what they do. And also help people explain the real value of what they're offering, because no one buys something because of what it is. They buy it because of the results of what it has on their lives. And so it's helping people, business owners and startups, differentiate themselves and attract more of their best clients and employees by using these stories to create the core, like in a unifying message to their company that helps them make all their business decisions, because they know where they're trying to go with their company and who they're trying to communicate with, and they know um, that if they are able to champion this message, then it's going to attract the sort of people that they're going to love working with, and it just helps make everything else in the running a business and growing a business easier, because there's just fewer decisions to make, or fewer like, I'm not sure if we should do X or Y. Well, let's see if it aligns with our mission statement and our purpose. If it does, let's consider more. If it doesn't, then no. And so having that powerful core mission statement just makes everything else a lot easier, and it's a lot more likely companies will succeed if they have that. And especially like lately, example of companies that have done this well is like Tom's Shoes went from a little like tiny startup to being, I think they're worth like $625 million when they were purchased.
Hmm.
Um, Airbnb, their whole thing, like their mission of like feel at home no matter where you are in the world, is kind of their mission, and they disrupted that industry a huge amount. Warby Parker did what Tom's did, but for glasses. And there's a number of these companies that um, went from startup to huge successful like companies that got acquired or coming along in disrupting industries, are all what I call missions with a business.
Hmm.
And these they're not necessarily like going all the way to like a B Corp, but B Corps are great for that. But you can basically still have this core powerful mission that um, helps make marketing and hiring and all the operations stuff way easier. And especially as you're trying to grow, knowing that if all your employees know how they fit into this larger mission and purpose, then you're going to avoid like the siloing and the splintering that happens when these companies grow. So those are the sort of things help people with their companies, is get that core mission and help it bring their mission statement to life so that they can use it throughout their company and increase their revenue and all sorts of like success looking for in companies. All can start with that strong foundation of a good mission statement.
That makes a lot of sense, and it's great that there's a company like yours to help with that storytelling.
Thanks.
Usually with this podcast, I leave the final word to our guests. So if you were to leave with one note for our startup founders and entrepreneurs listening to the podcast, what would that be?
The first one final thing I'd say was start with empathy. The more you can put yourself in like the other person's shoes, whether it's you're like a co-founder or one of your employees or your potential clients or like an investor, and think about a subject from the other person's perspective, um, and then before acting or before moving forward, you'll be amazed at how effective and how much better off your decision making and your actions will be, and more impactful or more successful your company is, because you're not just thinking about it from your own single perspective. And so often people just think of from their own way of seeing things. And even though like you think you know like a way to do it, or the best way to do it is probably not the case. And if you just take a chance to, or take a time to look at it from someone else's perspective, you'll often find um, a better way of doing things, and you'll make more connections that way, and you'll be more successful. So all starts with empathy like that.
I think that's a great final word. So, Carl, thank you again for joining us on the podcast, and to everyone,
Thanks for
I
having me.
look forward to the next episode with our future guests.
Thanks. Yeah, and if people want like some help with like their see where how their story is doing right now, I do offer a complimentary 30-minute story optimization session. I'll put a link. I'll give Eric a link to put in the comments or whatever. So if you're interested in basically seeing where your story is so far and what can be done to improve it, please book a time with me using the link.
Sounds good. Thanks, Carl.
Thanks.